Dungeons. Designing a good dungeon has always been hard for me. I started playing D&D when I was around 10 years old. The Lord of the Rings had just come out in theaters, so a lot of my most formative D&D memories revolved around large open battles and huge armies facing off against one another. I wouldn't run a dungeon until I was much further into my DMing career, and I've never really been able to nail them down. They've always felt a bit off. I feel like I had an idea of what they were supposed to be like, but I never really had one feel right. After watching videos from many amazing creators on YouTube, I still haven't quite found a dungeon philosophy that I'm comfortable with. The 5-room dungeon and Jaquazing the dungeon, these are fine techniques for mapping and plotting, but I still haven't found one that quite hits the mark for establishing what a dungeon should be. But I think I've created a method that works for me, and I wanted to share it in case there's anyone out there who feels the same way, or maybe you just want to try out a new method, and I call it the Triumvirate of Dungeon Philosophy. The first thing I try to decide is on the dungeon itself. Where is it located, and what was it originally for? It might seem silly that I'm going to put so much emphasis on this, but like I said, in order for my brain to kind of get a grasp on it and to run it the best way possible, it needs to have a cohesion. It needs to be coherent with all the other mechanics that are going on. And it also really helps to sell the idea that this is an old place that's lived in and not just a facade. Where and why is the dungeon located where it is? Is it high up in the mountains? Deep under the ocean, an arid desert underneath a podunk town? Who built it and what was it intended for at the time it was built? Is it a mausoleum to the queen of the mountain giants? Is it a secret shrine for a serpentine deity? Just an abandoned dwarven mine? I mean, all these places have elements that will make them feel like they had some purpose other than just being filled with monsters and traps. The giant queen's tomb wouldn't have narrow 5-foot hallways. It'd have huge hallways where the players might not even be able to see the ceilings by torchlight. And the staircases might even require a rope and grappling hook to scale. You know, the snake god's secret shrine wouldn't have stairs. It'd have slithering paths and coiling ramps to ascend and descend tunnels. The abandoned dwarven mine could still have equipment like picks, mine carts. It might even have some gnomish explosives or gnomish mechanical creations still wandering around, doing the mining. Now that we've deduced what the location was originally for, we can move on to the other aspects we need to decide, which is who's currently inhabiting this space. Some examples, of course, are the undead, aberrants, beasts, dragons, demons, devils. Each of these, of course, will bring its own flair into what the dungeon looks like now. Old rooms that used to be for one thing are now given a new purpose, and there are some relics left over that will inform the players as to what that room might have been. Now it's time for the third element, which is the conflicting force. Who's trying to stop what's happening in this dungeon, or at least have it investigated? Is someone trying to reclaim something? Why does anyone care if the baddies are there, essentially? This doesn't have a big impact on the design of the dungeon, but it informs the context of the dungeon's current inhabitants. Are they fortifying it, thinking there's someone who wants to storm it? Are they packing things up because they've gotten what they came for? The purpose of this aspect is to establish the mindset of the inhabitants. All too often, I think it's assumed that monsters and creatures in a dungeon are more or less static and just sitting around waiting for the adventurers to open the door and initiate combat. That's enough for now. Let's move on to actually creating some ideas for the dungeon. So for the original use of this dungeon, we are going to go with a pirate's cove. This was one time a pirate's treasure den where they would come back to do repairs on their ship, store their plunder, and resupply. The current inhabitants, anyone who knows my DMing style knows that necromancers are just my favorite thing to throw in there, so we'll throw some necromancers in and make it a kind of cult of the undead. For conflicting force, I'm going to use the authorities, or maybe the Lord Mayor or Magistrate of a nearby seaside town as the one who's going to be sending the players into this arena. Now that we have our 3 points, where each of these elements touch each other in this three-way Venn diagram is going to be something interesting. Where the dungeon's purpose meets the opposing force, we're going to mark down history and insights. There's some history between this pirate's den that's no longer used by pirates and this town. Where the opposing force meets the occupying force is going to be the motivation for exploration. It's going to be kind of why the town people care about what these necromancers are doing. Where the occupying force meets the original use is going to be a complication for the players. It's going to be something in the dungeon that's going to cause some kind of trouble and conflict for them. And in the middle of all these 3 things should be kind of what I think of as the boss, the dungeon boss. Where the pirates and the seaside town meet, we're going to say that a generation ago, the pirates regularly raid and pillage ships that wanted to trade with this nearby seaside town. Their lair was destroyed with the help of a chromatic dragon, and it was told that it had piles of plunder for the dragon to hoard, and in return, the town people would be saved. So now we know, when we design the dungeon, to include signs of this dragon storming the cove. Maybe there's some wrecked pirate ships, possibly even cave-ins where the dragon came in with its claws and tails and smashed up the caves. Where the necromancer meets the pirate cove, we're going to try to subvert expectations. A lot of the time when you hear necromancer, you can think zombies and skeletons shambling down dark halls and crawling out of tombs. But when you know it was once a pirate's hideaway, suddenly you imagine undead pirates swinging from decrepit riggings and with their waterlogged scimitars, cannons firing, flying spectral spirits, and half-decayed great white sharks in the waters below for anyone who fails an acrobatics check. Where the necromancer meets the seaside town, we're going to create the motivation. Perhaps ships are once again getting plundered before making it to the harbor. Maybe the townsfolk are hearing eerie, ghostly shanty songs in the middle of the night and being reminded of this history that they once had. Village elders and historians might think that there's a brand new band of pirates that have taken over refuge in the cove. And now we'll move on to the middle point, the boss. This should incorporate elements from all 3 of the areas. And for this example, I'm going to do the captain of the pirates. The old captain of the pirates escaped the dragon's attack and made a promise to the crew that they return and set sail again, having made a pact with a powerful lich or other worldly patron. So example number 2, I'm going to try to kind of create a more generic version and see how we can spice things up. So for the original use of this, we're going to go with my example of a dwarven mine, an abandoned dwarven mine, and the current inhabitants are going to be goblins. The conflicting force is going to be the dwarven family, the dwarven clan that used to own the mine that had to cease operations a long time ago due to some factor. So a good way to spice things up is to add another aspect and attach it, like so. This is going to be a hidden aspect that no one really knows about except for the people within it, and that is a rival dwarven family that has a connection to the goblins and to the dwarven mine. Each of these is going to require a new point of interest. The rival family may have hired the goblins to take the mine over to make it look more believable that it wasn't just a dwarven takeover. Meanwhile, the connection to the mine and the rivals might have been that they had a spy, and that spy killed a dwarven miner who had discovered a mithril vein or some other rare material. Maybe they even planned a cave-in of a large section of it that this rival dwarven mine now knows they need to go uncover. The connection between the goblins and the dwarven mine might be that they're fiddling around with some of the old mining equipment. You know, they're taking joyrides on the mining carts, but maybe they're even using liberal use of the explosives left over or the other gnomish machinations like drills or big golems or something to carry the heavy ore, and they're playing around with that. So anyway, I think this is how I'm going to be doing dungeons from now on, and I hope it's been useful. Let me know if you plan on using this and come back and tell me how it went. And let me know what it led you to create. I'm really interested to know. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.